The assignment was simple. Establish telepathic contact with a sentient being from a different species. 10 days, no implants, no external aids. Use only biological or cognitive adaptation. The instructions flashed across the display in white glyphs, then faded into the background of the lecture dome, leaving a silence that hummed louder than the overhead energy lights. Cassian Coyle squinted at the glowing panel in front of him, then looked up at the alien who had just given the task. Professor Resch was tall, vaguely insectoid, and entirely unreadable. Not because of his expression, he had none, but because telepathy was his species' default mode of interaction. Words were a courtesy Resch extended to the rest of the interstellar student body, most of whom didn't have psionic capabilities. Cassian raised his hand. Yes, Coyle. Resch's voice projected crisply from a translator node floating beside him. Question. What if our species doesn't naturally do telepathy? You adapt, Resch said, clipping the reply like a judge delivering a sentence. That is the exercise. A few of the other students, a mix of reptilian, crystalline, and gelatinous species, began murmuring, their own telepathic networks lighting up like fireworks. Cassian couldn't hear the thoughts, but he could see the faint flickers of brainwave exchange through his visor. He was the only human in the class, and the only one visibly panicking. After class, Cassian paced the narrow corridor outside the dome, muttering to himself and running one hand through his dark curls. He slapped his tablet against his thigh and pulled up the assignment again. No implants. No external aids. That clause had to be written with humans in mind. Most other species had some level of innate psionic capability. Humans, not so much. They had imagination, caffeine dependency, and a high tolerance for disappointment. He headed back to his dormitory pod, where everything smelled faintly of recycled air and overcooked protein bricks. The moment he entered, he triggered his holo terminal and started scanning through every scrap of neural research he could find. He skipped meals. He ignored messages. He even missed a safety drill, which earned him a warning from campus security. By the third day, Cassian had built a crude framework for what he was calling the cognitive resonance bridge. It wasn't telepathy, not in the traditional sense, but it might fool the assignment parameters. The idea was to detect and interpret brainwave patterns in real time, converting them into language or stimuli that the user could understand. A translator, but for thoughts. He worked through the night, soldering microconductors into a headband made from his spare sleepwear strap and a few scavenged components from an abandoned cleaning droid. The early version was clunky. It overheated after 4 minutes of use and once gave him a mild burn on the temple, but it worked barely. It picked up spikes in neural activity and translated them into basic emotional cues. Not words, but colors and tones. Cassian needed a test subject. Someone or something with a mind different enough from his to validate the concept. He found one on the 5th day. Her name was Selin, a Zarnethi student with a translucent body and no discernible mouth. She communicated entirely through thought pulses, and she was one of the few students who hadn't laughed during Resch's announcement. Selin, Cassian said, approaching her while she was absorbing nutrients through her skin near the nutrient bay. I need your help. She emitted a soft green glow, a Zarnethi gesture of curiosity. I built something. It might simulate, well, I dunno, a bridge between thoughts. If it works, maybe we can pass the assignment together. Selin pulsed a series of complex patterns which his headband translated into risk, intrigue, permission granted. Cassian exhaled. All right. Let's do this. They found an unused lab module at the edge of the station, away from the energy cores that interfered with brainwave readings. Cassian adjusted the headband on his forehead and activated the resonance field. Selin floated opposite him, her body flickering with anticipation. The first moment was static, just white noise and a faint ringing in his ears, then a burst of color: blue, violet, red. His monitor interpreted the spikes as emotional signatures overlaid with a rudimentary lexicon. A word emerged. Hello. Cassian's eyes widened. It works. Selin, it's working, she pulsed again, and the device translated it into a low chime that resolved into excitement. Connection. They spent hours exchanging thoughts, simple ones at first, then more complex ideas. Cassian learned that Zarnethi didn't dream, but they did experience something called memory blooming, where old sensations re-emerged in fractal patterns. Selin learned that humans cried when overwhelmed, and sometimes laughed at things that made no logical sense, but the strain was immense. By the 6th hour, Cassian had a nosebleed and a mild headache. He paused the session and lay down, groaning. "You all right?" Selin's pulse translated as raw concern. "Yeah, just need fluids and maybe a nap." He didn't nap, he passed out. When he woke up, 2 of Resh's assistants were hovering over him, a gelatinous medic named Vryn and a floating orb called Halex. Vryn checked his vitals while Halex interrogated him. "You used unauthorized neural tech." "I built it myself," Cassian croaked. "That does not make it authorized." Resh entered the lab 2 minutes later, his elongated head silhouetted against the corridor's glow. He surveyed the scene. Cassian on the floor, Selin still pulsing with residual thoughts, the device sparking faintly on a nearby bench. "You attempted to circumvent the parameters," Resh said. "Explain." Cassian pushed himself upright, wincing. "I didn't circumvent anything, I adapted. You said use biological or cognitive adaptation. My brain can't do what yours does, so I built an interface that lets me interpret the signals." "My brain's still doing the work." Resh paused, then he turned to Selin. "Did you experience coercion?" Selin's pulse was sharp and definite. "Negative." "Did communication occur?" "Affirmative." Resh stepped forward and picked up the headband. "This is not elegant, it is crude, inefficient. Potentially dangerous. But it works," Cassian said. Resh considered him. "You have 5 days left. Improve it, make it safe, then we will determine if it qualifies." Cassian nodded. "Understood." He was confined to the medbay for 24 hours for observation. The nosebleed had clotted, but the lingering headache remained. The medics determined he'd suffered minor neural strain, not uncommon in psionic training but rare for someone without innate abilities. By the time he was discharged, Selin had already compiled a list of improvements. She'd even gathered materials from her homeworld's supply cache: conductive gel, better energy stabilizers, and a lattice crystal that naturally amplified low-frequency brainwaves. Cassian grinned when he saw it all waiting on his workbench. "All right," he muttered. Round 2. The next version of the device was sleeker, cooled itself passively, and had a failsafe that shut down the system if neural activity exceeded safe thresholds. Cassian tested it on himself first, mapping his thoughts and emotional patterns until the system could recognize them in real time. Then he invited Selin back for another session. This time, they didn't exchange words. They exchanged images, memories, and abstract concepts. Cassian showed her a snowstorm from his childhood, the way the flakes melted on his skin, how he'd caught his breath at the silence that followed. Selin shared a memory bloom of her first orbital descent, when her kind emerged from the atmosphere and saw stars not distorted by fluid layers. And then something else happened. Cassian's monitor spiked. His ears rang. For a moment, he was seeing through Selin's perception, feeling the way her consciousness folded inward and outward simultaneously. The bridge wasn't just translating thoughts anymore, it was synchronizing them. Not full telepathy, but something astonishingly close. He shut it down before the failsafe could trigger, panting. That was beyond what I expected." Selin pulsed, agreement. "Awe, connection." Cassian slumped against the bench. "We might actually pull this off." The assignment deadline loomed, but for the first time since Resh had announced it, Cassian felt something like hope. Not just for the grade, but for something bigger. They weren't just bridging thoughts. They were bridging species. The resonance field collapsed with a soft whine, and Cassian blinked away the afterimages still hovering in his vision. His limbs felt heavier than before, not from fatigue exactly, but from something harder to pin down. Like his body was trying to realign itself after being temporarily shared. Selin's form hovered a few inches off the ground, her translucent membrane flickering with a subtle amber wash. It wasn't one of the emotions in the translation matrix. Cassian hadn't seen that color before. He reached for his water pouch and drained it in one go. "I think whatever that last part was, it went deeper than before," he said, rubbing his temple with the back of his hand. Was that intentional? Selin's hue shifted again, this time to a soft, pulsing gray, a questioning tone if the interface was interpreting it right. The headband's relay buzzed faintly in the background, trying to stabilize the readings. Cassian gave it a tap, then adjusted the lateral contact strip. You pulled me in. Not just ideas. I saw the inside of your thought structure, like being in a hallway made of light and mirrors. I didn't know it was possible to accidentally share perspective. The amber tone returned. I'll take that as neither did I, he muttered. The door hissed open before either of them could say anything else. A tall, quadrupedal figure ambled into the lab, its hooves clicking on the floor tiles. The thing's neck split in two halfway down, allowing its head to swivel independently of its shoulders. Cassian recognized it from Resh's lecture's Yorlan species, known for hyperspatial memory and an unfortunate tendency to narrate their own thoughts aloud. I was told a human constructed a cortical bridge without melting, the Yorlan announced. I am here to observe. I have snacks. Cassian eyed the translucent pouch dangling from one of the creature's side pouches. It looked like fermented seaweed wrapped in glass noodles. You can keep those. I already have. The Yorlan settled into a crouch, pulling out a hollerquarter shaped like a flat sphere. Proceed. Selin's glow dimmed slightly, a signal Cassian had come to associate with discomfort. He turned to the Yorlan. She doesn't want to be watched. I am not watching, I am observing. It is different, less judgmental, still creepy. I am capable of being silent. Cassian raised a brow. Are you? No, but I am capable of being quiet. Selin shifted position, rotating mid-air to face the wall. Cassian powered down the interface and slid it into his bag. Session's over for now, he said. We're making progress, not putting on a show. The Yorlan nodded, its neck twisting into an angle Cassian found biologically upsetting. Understood. I will return with fewer expectations and more ambiguity. As the creature trotted out, Cassian turned back to Selin. Sorry about that. The closer we get to real results, the more attention we'll draw. She pulsed a soft cyan acceptance, maybe. The emotional lexicon still struggled with some of the more nuanced frequencies, and Cassian hadn't had the time to refine it. There were limits to what one person, dehydrated and underfed, could achieve on borrowed equipment. Selin floated closer and extended a thin tendril of light from her core, resting it lightly against the headband. The interface buzzed once. Cassian's monitor displayed a new string of data. Inquiry, expansion, co-experience. You want to try again? He asked. Today, consent. Patience. Curiosity, he sighed. All right, but I'm not going full sync again without a buffer. That last dive nearly knocked my short-term memory into a coma. He rummaged through his bag and pulled out a tiny mesh patch, something he'd sewn together from spare neurogel, and a layer of thermal regulator mesh he'd peeled off the back of his chair. Not ideal, but it might slow the data surge enough for his brain to keep up. You're going to have to do most of the heavy lifting, he said, placing the patch on his temple. I'll just be the antenna. Selin aligned herself, and the interface pinged once more. This time, the connection settled faster. The field didn't hum, it purred. Cassian's consciousness expanded without warning. He found himself floating beside Selin in a place that wasn't real but felt more solid than the lab. The architecture was unfamiliar, made of shifting geometries and undulating surfaces that rearranged themselves as he looked at them. Are you building this? He asked aloud, though his voice echoed strangely. Selin's presence vibrated beside him. The space responded to her thoughts. When she focused, walls formed. When she questioned, they melted. It was thought manifest, a shared internal construct that responded to their combined perceptions. Cassian reached out toward a floating platform made of hexagonal glass tiles. It trembled, then solidified under his mental touch. This is wild, he whispered. A cluster of shapes emerged in the distance memories, maybe, or at least how Selin's species stored them. Each cluster shimmered with color and motion, and when Cassian leaned closer, one burst open into a sensory explosion of soundless melodies and weightless pressure. He stumbled back, blinking. I think I just tasted a concept, he muttered. Selin's mental signature pulsed with a flicker of orange and blue. It wasn't in the lexicon, but something about it made him grin. They stayed in the construct for what felt like minutes but might have been hours. When they finally disengaged, Cassian collapsed into the nearest chair, heart racing. "I don't even know how to describe that," he said, wiping his forehead. "It's like dreaming someone else's emotions." Selin pulsed softly. Agreement, boundary blending, integrity maintained. He nodded. "Yeah, I didn't lose myself. That's the weird part. It was like being me with subtitles." The door hissed open again, and this time Resh entered. Cassian straightened immediately, trying to look less like he'd just been emotionally flattened by a telepathic detour. Resh's antennae twitched once. "I expected less progress." "I am pleased to be wrong." Cassian let out a slow breath. "We've got a functioning two-way interface, not full telepathy but shared cognition, and some co-memory immersion, still working on safety buffers." Resh approached the bench, picking up the headband with a pair of elongated digits. "You used neurogel, from the chair padding, improvised but acceptable." Cassian blinked. "You knew. There are only 3 chairs in this wing with exposed regulator mesh. I assumed yours." Resh turned to Selin. "You willingly participated, affirmative, coherent, enlightening." Resh observed Cassian for a long moment. "You are not psionic, yet you accessed co-memory state without permanent degradation." "I took a nap," Cassian said. "That counts as degradation. Humor is not a defense against synaptic collapse. Then I'm in trouble." Resh placed the headband back on the bench. "You are to present your results in 2 days, before the board." Cassian blinked. "Board?" Resh's mandibles clicked. "This exceeds classroom scope." "You are now a research case." Cassian's stomach twisted. "Do I get extra credit?" "You get monitored closely. If you survive, perhaps a commendation." Selin pulsed a quick gold flash behind him. Cassian didn't need the translator for that one. "Great," he muttered. "Just what I needed." An audience and a potential brain aneurysm. Resh turned toward the door. 2 days, prepare." As the professor exited, the lab fell into silence again. Cassian sat back, running a hand through his hair. Selin drifted beside him, her glow steady. "Well," he said finally. "No pressure, right?" She pulsed a single word, triumph. Cassian smiled despite himself. "Let's not get cocky. I still have to explain to a bunch of alien academics why I strapped a memory sponge to my head and didn't die." Selin rotated once, her body flickering with a new pattern. Cassian glanced at the monitor. Transcendence, collaboration, unknown awaits. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go find out what else this thing can do." Cassian stood in front of the presentation chamber's threshold, rubbing the bridge of his nose as the door's surface shimmered like a soap bubble. A faint citrus-scented vapor hissed from the wall recess's standard decontamination mist, mildly antiseptic, vaguely annoying. He swallowed hard. His tongue still tasted like copper from the second sync session, and there was a pulsing pressure behind his right eye that hadn't eased since sunrise. Selin floated beside him, her translucence muted in the dim corridor light. She hadn't spoken, not in pulses, not in gestures, since they'd left the lab module. Cassian wasn't sure if it was focus or nerves. Either way, she was hovering with the stillness of someone preparing to walk into a storm and pretend it was a drizzle. "You ready?" he asked. Her core light flickered once, then brightened into a steady pale violet, not curiosity, not excitement, something quieter. Trust, maybe. The door dissolved into a ripple and admitted them. The chamber wasn't large. It was circular, with layered seating rising along the curve of the wall. A dozen species sat in silence, some on cushions, some on hover discs, one in a tank that sloshed slightly with every turn of its occupant's amber eyes. Professor Resh stood near the central dais, hands clasped behind his elongated back. The headband sat on a low pedestal beside him, cleaned and gleaming. Cassian stepped forward. His boots made soft contact with the floor, which gave a little under each step, like soft clay underfoot. He cleared his throat once. No implants, no aids. That was the rule. There wasn't a flicker of response, just the quiet, ambient hum of the chamber's support systems. "I couldn't do that the way your species could, so I built something that let us meet halfway." He gestured to Selin, who drifted to his side without a sound. "Selin and I have conducted 4 interface sessions. The last one lasted nearly 3 hours and involved shared spatial cognition, emotional blending, and synchronized recall. The system doesn't translate language, it lets us interpret experience. We don't hear each other. We sense each other. A crystalline being near the upper tier raised one of its ridged arms. Its voice sounded like pebbles being shaken in a jar. Do you claim you achieved telepathy? No, I'm saying we built a new form of communication. One that runs parallel to telepathy but doesn't need native psionics. It's not mind reading, it's mind sharing kind of, but with permissions. A second voice, this one a low gurgle from the tank, and the neural strain. Human brains are not designed for such coupling. Cassian nodded. Right. That's why I modified the system. The first version nearly gave me a seizure. I adjusted the feedback loop and added a delay buffer to prevent memory compression. There was some short-term cognitive fatigue, but no permanent damage. I had it monitored. Resh stepped forward. Demonstrate. Cassian picked up the headband. Selin pulsed a slow, green-tinged light and floated to face him. He fitted the band over his temples, adjusted the contact pads, and activated the resonance field. The chamber lights dimmed automatically, and a soft ripple of static buzzed through the floor. The connection settled in under 10 seconds. Cassian's perception expanded not violently, but like water soaking into cloth. The space between him and Selin filled with faint textures of thought. He focused on a memory, a corridor back on Earth, lined with vending machines that never worked right. Selin responded with a mental image of a nutrient exchange coral from her home world, pulsing and fragrant. They layered the two constructs, clashing colors, contrasting smells, yet somehow harmonious, not a conversation. A duet. Cassian pulled back gently, ending the sync. The lights returned. Resh tilted his head. You did not speak, yet all of us saw the exchange. Cassian tapped the headband. I added a projection relay. It visualizes dominant thought patterns during sync. That way, even non-participants perceive the exchange. It's not perfect, but it's enough to observe the interaction. The crystalline being rustled slightly. How is consent ensured? The interface requires both parties to calibrate to each other's rhythm before it activates. If one isn't willing, the sync fails. We tested it. An avian figure with a fan of metallic feathers leaned forward. Have others used it? Cassian hesitated. No. Just Selin and me. It's calibrated to our neural patterns, but it can be adapted. Different species would need different buffers, different filters. Resh approached the platform. And if we asked you to demonstrate with another volunteer, Cassian blinked. Now, a ripple of interest passed through the room. Resh gestured. Jaxari, step forward. A squat, hex-limbed creature rose from the lower tier. Its skin was a dull mauve, covered in overlapping plates. Its species, the Vexarn, were known for high cognitive density and near-perfect memory retention. Cassian had never spoken to one. Jaxari climbed onto the platform and tilted its head sideways. I have no interest in your species' dietary obsessions or sentimental attachments to weather phenomena. Noted, Cassian said. Let's keep it simple. Basic emotional resonance and shape recall. He adjusted the headband, tweaked the input dial, then offered the second contact pad to Jaxari. The Vexarn hesitated, then pressed it to its brow. The sync took longer, nearly 20 seconds. The first wave of data came in jagged. Cassian's vision blurred. He gritted his teeth, dialed down the sensitivity, and waited. Slowly, the pattern smoothed. He focused on a geometric shape, a 6-pointed star. Jaxari responded with a cube. Cassian added rotation. Jaxari folded the cube inward, morphing it into a spiral. They layered the constructs, then added color, one blue, the other yellow. The interface pulsed and projected the fusion into the chamber. A rotating star-spiral hybrid, shifting through hues like an oil slick. Cassian disengaged with a slow exhale. Jaxari removed the pad and blinked twice. Acceptable. Resh turned to the others. You've seen it. A human brain interfacing with two distinct species through a cognitive bridge. No implants, no coercion, no pre-existing psionic channels. The avian's feathers rustled. It's not elegant, but it's functional. The being in the tank burbled, and scalable. Cassian raised a hand. With time. And help, I'm not an engineer, I'm just determined. Resh took the headband from him and studied the contacts. You've met the assignment's requirement and surpassed it. Cassian blinked. Does that mean? Resh interrupted, you passed, but more importantly, you've created something new. Crude, yes, dangerous, potentially, but revolutionary. Selin floated closer, her glow softening into a pale gold. Cassian let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. So, I'm not getting expelled. You are being offered a research grant. He stared at Resh. Wait, seriously, limited funding. Access to the neural labs and oversight. You will not do this alone. Jaxari grunted. I volunteer to contribute. Your interface lacks structural elegance. The crystalline being raised an arm. I will assist in refining the emotional lexicon. The avian spread its metallic fan. I have experience in cognitive delay mapping. I will supervise your buffer recalibration. Cassian turned to Selin. You in? She pulsed once. Purpose, continuity, partnership. Resh handed the headband back. You have 1 week to submit a research outline. Until then, rest. Your brain is not made for prolonged strain. Cassian nodded. Yeah, I could do with a sleep cycle or two. The chamber doors opened again, and as the attendees filed out, Cassian remained where he was. Selin hovered beside him, silent but present. He looked down at the headband in his hands, then back at the now empty pedestal. Not bad for a sleepwear strap and a cleaning droid's memory board. Selin pulsed once. Ingenuity. Cassian smiled, then winced. That headache is back. You'll adjust, said Resh as he passed by. Human resilience is your most infuriating trait. Cassian watched him go. I'll take that as a compliment. Selin flickered a shade of coral. Yeah, Cassian said. Me too.